Homo sapiens. Welcome to Anthropology for Homo sapiens. I'm your host, Adrianna, and today I'm going to give you some theoretical tools to help you view the world anthropologically. Nuance! Seriously though, nuance is a very important part of anthropological thought. As my mentor from Western University, Dr. Kim Clark, always said, everything is always more nuanced. It's something that anthropologists understand in our work and take very seriously, because we know that no matter how many pages of rich, thick description we give to people's culture, individual daily lives and existence, or even biological processes, humans will always be more complex. There will always be more to learn. Some individual will always be an exception to the rule, and in fact, there will probably be multiple exceptions to every rule. So nuance is important, but it doesn't mean that our work isn't relevant or important or overly complicated. We can write really amazing anthropological texts and theories and studies and still make really great recommendations, because we understand that when we give these recommendations, we have to be reflexive and we have to take into account that anything that we're looking at and explaining is always going to be a little more complicated than what we can put into words, and there'll always be more perspectives. So understanding nuance and respecting complexity are really important parts of anthropological thought. But generally, in order to think anthropologically, we sort of rest our thinking on three central tenets. The first is holism, and then we have relativism, and finally participant observation. Now, participant observation is really a method, and it's probably something I'll talk about in a later episode. But today we're going to focus on how participant observation as a method actually informs our theories and thinking. So let's start with holism. So holism comes from the word whole, as in something that is one or complete in and of itself. In anthropology, there are two ways we think about holism. The first is that we avoid dualism and compartmentalization. So while biomedicine might refer to the mind and the body as two separate things, an anthropologist would conceptualize of a mindful body or an embodied mind. This also means that we view societies as inseparable wholes. Like, you can't really understand religion without understanding the history and the politics and the ways of knowing that have contributed to its conception and its development through time. Another way to think about holism is that individual parts of anything sort of come together synergistically. So synergy meaning that together, those parts that were separate, they create a whole that is greater than the sum of those individual parts. So if we're thinking about things in a cultural sense, if we're looking at religion and education and family structure, looking at any of those individual things isn't going to give us as much rich detail and full understanding as it would if we looked at how all those things interact to create one whole society. The concept of holism can also help us connect to the four subfields of anthropology. When we look at an individual or a society, we know that we need to understand its biology, its culture, history, and language in order to fully grasp the nuance of that individual or society. So holism tells us that nothing exists in a vacuum. We're all part of a greater whole. And this is super important to anthropological thought, as I said. But it can also inform our thinking about our own daily lives if we're reflexive. So consider, for example, how you're a part of a greater community, whether that community is your family, your neighborhood, or even your town. You're a part of that community, and by the interactions that you have and the things that you do, volunteering, paying taxes, even just walking down the street and talking to people, you're creating something that has synergy that's going to be greater than any single part. And that can help us form communities that help each other and create a really positive space. We can also think of it with regards to our own mental health, and it's something that can help us stay balanced in life. So for example, if you're struggling with your mental health, it's not all just the mental stuff like meditation and going to therapy. You also have to be attentive to your physical needs like nutrition and exercise and fresh air. as well as your social needs, like cutting toxic relationships and maintaining healthy ones. Okay, so in addition to holism, we have this concept called relativism, and it's another really important tenet of anthropological thought. Relativism is a concept that we get from the Boasians, or the founding school of American anthropology under Franz Boas at Columbia University. The concept shows us that other cultures aren't weird. They just appear that way when people examine them with what's called an ethnocentric lens. So, in other words, when we apply the rules, values, and understandings of our own culture to interpret another, we create sort of a warped picture. All cultures make sense and are functional for the people who practice them, at least most of the time and to some degree. The definition of relativism is that knowledge, truth, and morality exist in relation to culture, society, and/or historical context, and are not absolute. Simply put, everything must be understood within its own context. Now, a lot of anthropologists today have important criticisms of relativism. These mainly point to how relativism can be taken too far. This is called relativistic fallacy. Now, that isn't to say that we should go back to applying an ethnocentric lens to our studies, just that we need to balance our emic or inside perspective with our etic or outside perspective, so that we can avoid bias but still criticize cultural practices and power structures that might be harmful. So, relativism has its critics, but it is valuable to think with. And once again, we'll take it back to our own daily lives. Think about how relativism might help you to situate someone in your life so that you can have better empathy with their position. Or how it might help you to actually win an argument, whether that's political or just about, something easy like getting a pet. It can help you put that person in position. You can understand the person that you're arguing with and where they're coming from. And then you can attack their arguments from their own perspective. It can be a really helpful tool. So we've talked about holism and relativism. The last thing we're going to look at is participant observation. And when we're talking about participant observation, I'm going to link it up to the values and theories that I think sort of underlie it and help us think through it, which is really just about having empathy with lived experience. Bronislaw Malinowski, an anthropologist working in the Trobriand Islands during the First World War, was the first, or one of the first, anthropologists to tell us to take a step off of the veranda and step right into the worlds of the people that we're studying. Participant observation is the third tenet of anthropological thought, and it takes the shape of a qualitative research method in which the researcher not only observes the research participants, but also actively engages in their daily activities. Theory and method in anthropology are often intimately connected, as I would argue they should be, and the centrality of participant observation is reflected in anthropological thinking in the form of empathy with people's lived experiences. In other words, participant observation allows anthropologists to some extent to embody the lived experiences of their research participants, to come to understand their lives by participating in them. This means that when they later write up their findings or attempt to analyze something else, anthropologists are trained to be empathetic, to understand and embody the feelings of others. It also means that we value lived experience. We bring our work to policymakers or get involved in advocacy initiatives and social movements. We know that people with lived experience of a situation will best know how we can improve and learn from that situation. And we can bring their experience to people who can make the changes. So participant observation and having empathy with lived experience can help us in our daily lives too. Maybe it's a little bit more of a stretch, but if you think about it, participant observation is all about trying new things. So whether that's participating in a friend's cultural rituals that they've invited you to so that you can better understand their life and where they're coming from, or something that's not necessarily cultural, just trying a new food or a new dance, or even just a new activity like skateboarding or ballroom dancing, whatever it might be. It's just about trying new things and learning through doing. And that doesn't have to be about trying new things either. It can just be about how we learn with our hands, with our actions, and with our bodies. And having empathy, of course, is always important to our lives. If we can have empathy with the people around us, we can build a really beautiful world. So I hope this video has sort of given you some background on the really deep theoretical things that we think about in anthropology, because they will come up a lot going forward. They're really important things that I think really bring together all 4 subfields. Of course, each subfield has its own take on them, and everyone applies them a little bit differently, because we all have nuance, of course, in how we interpret things. But really, these 3 central things are what makes anthropology unique as a field. And they're things that can help us live more anthropologically. So, as always, make sure you subscribe. Send me an email if you have any questions or things you want me to address in future videos. And as Ruth Benedict would say, let's go make the world safe for human differences.